Ladies and gentlemen, hello. Welcome back to JXE Streams at E3 2015. My name is Anthony John Agnello, streams producer here at Engadget.com. And we have a very special treat today. We have Mr. William... Bill, I want to make sure I have your name right. This is William Sternberg. Am I getting that correct?
Yes, actually, you're one of the few. You got it right. It's you can just call me Bill, though. That's what I go by.
Bill Sternberg. Now, you have to understand, Bill, that I never get anybody's name right ever on any stream. I get my own name wrong. Every now and again, we start up and I'm like, "Hello, I'm Anwan." What? No. Wait, that's not right at all. That is terrible. Yes, hello everybody that has stuck with us in the chat. So Bill is here to tell us about a game called Cosmic Star Heroine. This is, Bill, this is the 5th game from Zeboyd Games or the 4th? Because I wasn't sure how you guys were counting the Penny Arcade entries.
Right, well, we call it our 5th game. You know, the Penny Arcade games 3 and 4 are actually kind of different from each other. We made some changes to the gameplay and opened up the game world and did a few other things. So to us, really, this is our big 5th game, and it's the one we're really trying to push our skills that we've developed in those first 4 as far as we can take them.
So, my very first experience with your guys' games was with Breath of Death 7. Now, if anybody watching has not played Breath of Death was a game, and I please do not take this the wrong way, but when you see Breath of Death sitting in the XNA indie store on Xbox 360, you look at it and you're like, I'm gonna pay $1 for that, and there's gonna be I'm expecting tentacle porn and all kinds of weird things to be happening, and instead it turns out to be this incredibly fast, hilarious, funny RPG. And it's not, there's this misconception, it seems, about what you guys do, in that you just make these old JRPGs that mimic stuff from the 8, 16, and 32-bit era, and that's just not the case. The games that you guys make, they capture that feel, but they have none of the negatives. They're never slow, they're never plotting, they're never punishing. And I'm curious, what for you is so appealing about that era and that style of game, and how do you guys keep yourselves in check? How do you make sure that you're not, recreating the mistakes of the past, that you're making something that isn't too faithful?
Right. Well, there's something about the limitations of the hardware from the 8, 16, and 32-bit consoles that I think allowed a lot of developers back then to focus on how do we make the mechanics themselves fun, and how do we present this explorable world and tell these stories within these limited confines of hardware. Like today, with the power and the processing and the data space that you have on Blu-ray, discs and stuff, they can have these elaborate CG cutscenes and in-game cutscenes, and there's almost this huge amount of space to tell the stories and do anything they want with the mechanics and game worlds. So I think a lot of developers back in the 16-bit era they could just push the limitations of those consoles in interesting ways. And I also think that it's just like they were coming up with all of these new ideas because the genre was still relatively fresh. And I think a lot of these games that were classics back then they stood out to us back then, and they stuck with us after all these years. So that's why they're appealing. As far as today, what do we do that keeps us from getting kind of mired in the things that weren't so great? I think it's our appreciation for RPGs now too. We like modern day RPGs. It's not one or the other, and I think there aren't a lot of games that sort of combine the two. It's not just about taking a 16-bit style game and giving it stuff like a save anywhere option. It's a lot more about streamlining battle systems or creating new ways of getting players diverse strategies in battles and customization options that are more common in modern RPGs, but you don't see them within the structures of older RPGs that people still really like. So we try and essentially modernize the old style, I guess, is one way to put it.
So how has that process changed with modernizing from Breath of Death onto Cthulhu, onto the Penny Arcade games, and now with Cosmic Star Heroine? Cosmic Star Heroine is a far more ambitious game, I would say, from the outside in terms of scale, in terms of production values. It seems like you guys are sort of going for the gusto in a way that you haven't before. So tell me about like the evolution of your guys' process.
Well, I guess the biggest difference, and I will say that you're right, it's a much, much more ambitious game, Cosmic Star Heroine, than our past stuff. And it's because we feel like we have the experience in terms of design and sort of molding a game into the final product that we want, that we feel confident enough to tackle this. You know, a year and a half ago, if you asked us if we would ever do a game with sort of the scope of Chrono Trigger, that kind of thing, we would probably say, no, that's impossible. No way. You're crazy.
Well, why do you say it's impossible? Like, obviously, Chrono Trigger is a game made by a staff of, like, 50 people, and it's just a few of you, but, like, why is that impossible?
Well, we would have thought it was impossible, like, a year and a half, or, a couple of years before we started this, because there's so much detail in that game in terms of assets, and there's such a huge world and variety of worlds. There's also a very complex battle system in terms of not only, you have multiple characters and with different skills and abilities that also combine with each other with, their various techs and things like multi-character techs. It's also got a tremendous amount of detailed and varied assets in game, and the on-map battle system creates this huge amount of overhead for developing assets too, because you're not just doing a static battle screen. So anyway, it's a very ambitious thing to do all of that, as opposed to a game where you have fixed, random encounters on, Cthulhu Breath of Death side, or just encounters and battles that happen off screen in, Rain Slick 3 and 4. And the biggest thing that changed for us, the biggest thing we've had to really come to terms with making Cosmic Star Heroine, is that we can no longer, draw a very bright line between the work that I do on our games and the work Robert does. So our past games, we did them fairly quick. I think the longest time it took us was 10 months to make Rain Slick 3 or 4. And for the most part, I did, built assets, built the game world. Robert developed the character abilities and level trees and enemies and battle designs, and we sort of combine them as we go. With Cosmic Star Heroine, we're basically cooperating with each other on every aspect of it in a much more comprehensive way. So just as one of many, many examples, with the battles, I can't just build a map like a dungeon and just be done with it and let Robert decide how many battles should go into it with however many enemies and design the battle however he wants later. We have to decide how many battles are going to be in the dungeon at the outset so that I can construct the places into the map where they're going to take place. And I need to know how many enemies they're going to be and how big the enemies are going to be so that I can make sure there's room. And we also have to have a general idea of what enemies they're going to be so that they thematically make sense. So that's just one example. Everything from the story has been very collaborative between the two of us to make sure that there's, that it has more depth. We're not just doing, a silly parody type story with this. Although there is humor, we want to make sure that it's complex but sensible and there's no plot holes. And this is really just a game where we're very serious about fixing or addressing some of the things we felt our first 4 games lacked, and just doing a really polished and professional job with it.
So, all right, here is, I guess, where I want to start. Then, because, man, you just said so many things that made me want to go in a billion different directions. But to start with, why do you think humor is so essential? Because I think that this is something that a lot of RPGs don't get, is that humor is a good thing. Humor can be there, and you don't need to overdo it, and you don't necessarily need to be goofy if you have humor there. You know, I think that's something that makes those classics that people always look to, like Chrono Trigger, which you mentioned before. Yeah. You know, that humor is what makes it so powerful and memorable, because it humanizes the very dramatic, severe stuff. So why do you think humor is so essential?
Well, for one, I mean, humor is something we started out with. Like, obviously, Breath of Death and Cthulhu were very silly games. And something we've kind of noticed, and you probably have too, with a lot of indie RPGs right now, is they seem to either be like pure comedy, satire, silly parody, like entirely, or they seem to be super melodramatic and, you know, grim, dark and stuff with their story, and there's not much in between. But something that's always been compelling for us are games like the Lunar series, and that's a big inspiration for us for this game, is where it has an overarching sort of serious and plot line and character development, but the characters themselves they're warm to each other, and there's lightheartedness there too. It's not just, you know, what do we do next, and, you know, the Dark Lord has invaded our town and slaughtered our friends and family, and now I'm depressed. You know, it makes them more likable, I think, with humor. I think humor is just another ingredient, and it shouldn't really be the whole thing, like, you know, maybe Breath of Death was, but it shouldn't be left out completely, even when you're making a story that has some complexity and some seriousness to it. And I think just having that ingredient in there, especially at appropriate times, is very compelling to the player. It makes you feel like the characters are just more realistic and more likable when you do it right.
Yeah, I could not agree more. There are some folks here in the chat who automatically are agreeing with that assessment. You know, Duke here in the chat is just saying, like, Lunar right up there with Final Fantasy VI, you know, for best ever, and it's for exactly the reasons that you're talking about. It's such a wonderful thing to sort of point to. And CM Bascara, which that one I'm just mangling. You know, nobody comes up with an online handle that is, you know, just for its pronounceability. And he says, complex yet sensible. No Evangelion meets Xenogears meets the Big O meets Drankagard in the story department then. Pity. Oh. I think, like, that is all of the things that you don't want to do. That's, like, all of the grimdark that you just described. So, the other thing that you said before that I wanted to touch on is you said that you wanted to avoid some of the mistakes that you had made previously. So, what do you guys think were your mistakes in your previous games? What are you trying to avoid this time?
So, our big thing isn't so much avoiding mistakes as it is doing or fleshing out areas of our games that we haven't really fleshed out before. So, a big mistake is just simply not pushing other areas. So, our first 4 games are very, very focused on, I guess, the battle systems. The battle systems have always been pretty fleshed out in our games, and there's been a lot of options. There's been a lot of customization options for players. All the way, you know, Breath of Death, at each level up, you could choose between 2 abilities and things like that, and sort of pick your own strategies as you went. And then Rain Slick 3 and 4, you had classes, and you had different monsters that you could recruit and change out your battle strategies by changing those out. Those were all really good, and I think Cosmic Star Heroine walks a good balance of that kind of depth and complexity while still being intuitive. But some things that we really never fully fleshed out, or I don't think we went far enough with our first 4 games, is number one is that, you know, the storylines, which are good, especially 3 and 4, where we had Jerry Holkins, you know, helping with that. But a big thing is that with the stories, they always sort of felt like you were at some event in one part of the game, and all it did is really just give you an excuse to go to the next dungeon or the next town. And then when you got there, you got your next excuse to go to the next thing. I don't think there was a very good overarching plot with interconnected strands of the storyline and the characters. There was never a whole lot of, say, foreshadowing, and there was never really that many callbacks to what happened earlier that that go on later in the story. And I think really fleshing it out is something really important to us for this game. Another thing that just drove me crazy about our first 4 games that I really want to fix, and we're doing it, is the dungeons. The dungeons had gotten, I think, better as far as playability with our 4 games, but you never did anything in our dungeons besides battle and try to make it out. Maybe you found a chest or 2 along the way. And I've always felt like that was something really lacking in our games. So with Cosmic Star Heroine, and this goes back to what I said about really cooperating as a team, me and Robert, coming up with ways to do this, is to give each dungeon at least something useful or interesting or a new take on it or a new dungeon mechanic, some way to unlock the next area of the path that's not just fighting another battle and moving on. So I think that's going to have a huge impact. Other than that, it's little things. It's having a polished user interface. We always kind of put those together really quickly in our past games. So Cosmic Star Heroine has a much more polished, much quicker, more informative user interface for the main menus. The battle system, I think, is clearer, quicker to use. And and then the last thing is towns. In our past games, towns are essentially a facade for shops. Right. For this, every town has at least something critical about it to the game that makes it interesting, makes it useful to be there, besides talking to NPCs and getting funny dialogue and then finding the shop, buying a new weapon, and moving on. So I think with all of this stuff that we've really wanted to do that we've never done in our past games is our biggest, I guess, correction of error that we want to do for Cosmic Star Heroine.
So it's really funny that you talk about all these ways that you want to change your towns and you want to change your dungeons, and I feel like especially people that that love JRPGs but don't necessarily play the old ones as often as they may have once, that they forget that there really wasn't a whole lot to dungeons for a long time. There really wasn't a whole lot to towns. Like, if you go back and play Final Fantasy IV now, like, there's that criticism of Final Fantasy 13, like, oh, it's just a hallway. It's just a hallway. So was Final Fantasy IV. Like, there is nothing to that game. You walk into a cave. Maybe every now and again you will deviate off the path for a few steps and get a treasure chest, and then you go back to the main path and you just keep pushing forward, and then you go to a town, there's one person to talk to, but the rest is just shops. So, is it a challenge for you guys in Cosmic Star Heroine to sit there and think, we want all of these things to be special, we want it to feel great, we want these dungeons to feel very, filled with depth and complexity. They must do something. Do you struggle to keep that sort of classic feel, as you sit there and spice things up?
Well, I don't think so. We don't, we're not too terribly concerned about will this feel like the classics so much as we just want it to feel fun to us. As long as we feel like we're nailing the fun factor, we're not too concerned about whether people are going to say, oh, this feels like, Phantasy Star. I think something that, and that's kind of something we've always done. We've always been concerned about getting it to work and getting it to be fun. And I think as long as we keep doing that, it's our inspirations for these games that come out from that. And if we make it fun, and we're inspired by the things we like, and the things we like are, games that, you'd mentioned, I think it comes out in the way our games play without feeling like we're trying to duplicate it. So I guess by sort of just doing our own thing based on what inspires us and what we like, kind of gives it its own feel, but it never strays so far away from the sort of the era that we're dealing with that it feels out of place either.
So in your work on Cosmic Star Heroine, how has the game changed most significantly between now and when you first conceived it? You guys had a very successful Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah.
It really took off, and it took off enough that you were able to do things. You were able to hit those stretch goals and change the game from even your initial pitch. So how has the game changed, in your opinion, the most?
Well, just to clarify, we didn't really set stretch goals because we didn't want to let the scope get out of hand. But it did go past its funding goal by a significant amount. But the game itself has not changed from the vision that we had for it with the Kickstarter. So not at its core. If anything's changed from the beginning of the Kickstarter, it's just kind of like, wow, we're getting things to be a little bit better, a little bit more streamlined than we thought we could when we pitched it. So in our minds, it's turning out better than we expected, which I didn't expect to happen because it's already ambitious to begin with. But just a lot of things like the battle system, we have got it streamlined and sped up a lot since we first showed it in an alpha footage at PlayStation Experience and on YouTube. We've got that streamlined. We've got it sped up. We've got a lot of the abilities that the characters use. They look pretty decent, but the main thing is that they move quickly and the characters take, turn by turn by turn, so that you're not wasting time watching, another tech or ability play out for 30 seconds before moving on.
Right.
Things like that, and just a lot of silly things like there's a part in the dungeon that we're showing at E3 where you come across this item on the ground and the character picks it up and she gains a new ability. And something that we wouldn't have done in our last games is having like an on-map cutscene where she conjures this weapon into the air and it blows down a tree, and by doing so it opens up a new path. Like things like that are working out better than we thought. We were kind of at the very beginning of the Kickstarter where we were thinking we were going to take this sort of general quality that we're pitching and make it kind of scoped like Rain Slick 4 and build it out in Unity so we can get it on different platforms, but it's turning out better than we thought. So that's the big change. If you want to talk about the ideas where this was originally conceived in like 2012, it's changed a lot since then. But as far as from the Kickstarter to now, it's still that thing that we pitched, but more polished and streamlined, and it's turning out really well.
So we do have some questions here from the chat. RenderB wants to know, when will you guys make a Sailor Moon spinoff?
Oh my God.
I think that's an absurd question, and I also wanted the answer. No.
Oh, okay. You joke, but see, Cosmic Star Heroine originally was conceived back when we were doing kind of parody games.
Yeah.
And the current idea of Cosmic Star Heroine is she's a secret agent, like undercover, but she's like a super spy, kind of like James Bond. The original idea for Cosmic Star Heroine is that she was like a young girl who is like an amazing secret agent, but her cover story is that she was like basically a pop star, like idol. So it was going to be like this really cheesy thing where you had to balance the RPG aspect of managing your career as like a pop idol while also fighting off bad guys in the like underbelly of the universe.
Bill, I realize that you're trying to finish a game right now, but will you please make that game too?
Yeah, no, maybe. I don't know. We have so many ideas, but that's what it started as, and I don't know.
That is pretty ridiculous. There is another question here. Duke did want to know, is there going to be an Xbox One version? I know you guys right now are PC, Mac, Linux, PS4, and Vita, right? That is what is announced.
So we have announced an Xbox One version, and it's definitely coming. Yes. All right. So that's official. The reason a lot of people have not heard about it, maybe, is because we wanted to make sure that we had a confirmation from Microsoft that we could do an Xbox One version before we announced it. So we didn't want to pitch the Kickstarter as PS4, Vita, PC, Xbox One, because at the time we had only got a complete confirmation for PS4 Vita and PC on Steam. You know, we've actually seen other Kickstarters pitch a whole bunch of platforms, and then later on when the game is almost finished, they never got the green light from a platform, maybe Sony or Microsoft, to release there. And now a lot of backers that wanted that platform just flat out can't get it.
Yeah.
So we simply said we're going to try to get on Xbox One if we can when we launched it. And then about, I want to say a few weeks later, we finally got approved as developers for ID at Xbox, and Cosmic Star Heroine got approved for that. So it's absolutely coming to Xbox One. And we've also been getting a lot of presence at E3 and at the PlayStation Experience through Sony. So you hear about it from the Sony booths and stuff, which is a huge deal for an indie team, mind you. I mean, Sony's doing a lot for us. But that's probably a reason why you hear less about the Xbox One version, simply because we weren't able to announce it with the launch of the Kickstarter. And
you're getting that exposure from Sony's booth.
Oh yeah, for sure. But we would have if we had gotten that green light, or if we had been approved for ID at Xbox when we did the Kickstarter, it would have been in the title of the Kickstarter pitch as well.
There is so our regular viewers are very keen to know, and this is the question of the week here on our E3 streams. All right, how does Cosmic Star Heroine use the light bar on the PlayStation 4 controller?
Oh my god. You mean the glowing bar on the front of the controller?
The glowing bar on the... Bill, do you understand that not one person has looked at us and said, oh yeah, we absolutely thought about that? The reaction is always, oh my god.
Well, we're still making the game, and it's still mainly... Okay, so we're trying to finish the content, and the lead, and we're developing it on the PC first.
Yeah.
And it works on the PS4, and that's where it's being shown today. But consequently, we haven't dug into any platform-specific features.
Right.
So that said, like, I forgot that the light bar was a thing.
Right. I don't think anybody remembers that the light bar is a thing, man. I think you're perfectly forgiven for that, Bill.
We really want to do cross-play and like cross-save function on PS4 Vita, things like that, and support trophies and everything. Those are on the top of our minds when we think about the PlayStation version. But you mentioned the light bar, and I'm like, oh yeah,
that's right.
So
that
maybe we can do something with it. I don't know. We haven't gotten there yet to even for that to even come up.
So, this is like, I don't want to get too deep in the tech weeds, but I have spoken with a few people that have had the opportunity to get their game on, the PlayStation machines, and they've tried to explain how difficult it is to actually make cross-save work. And
okay.
I am curious. Have you gotten to a point like you're not that far along where those console specific things are even coming up, like you said? So that's not something you've really had to deal with yet, huh?
Right, not yet. So ask us in a few months, and we'll have a better idea.
So there is some folks were saying here in the chat that it is the dreaded question that you guys refuse to even indulge in on Twitter, but.
Yeah.
Is there a release window beyond 2015 for Cosmic Star Heroine at this point?
Oh, no, there's not yet. I mean, it's not a matter of we don't want to spoil the release date. It's more like we want to make sure that we are finished and polished and everything's set, and that we can also we still need to go through a lot of the certification stuff with these consoles that we've never really had to do before. And we're not sure how long that takes. I'm pretty sure we also need an ESRB rating, and that also adds some overhead to the schedule. And so, there's things we haven't done for this that we're going to need to do, and we're not sure how long. Maybe the game could be in the beta polishing or whatever stage, and the certification stuff takes like an extra 3 months when the game is almost done, and it adds a month on to the release date that we didn't anticipate. So it's really just, let's make sure everything is like in the beta, like polishing phase, and we have already started, or at least gotten progress on the certification stuff, or the the ESRB and things like that, that we'll have a much, much, much better idea of when this game will actually be released. Right now, we just want to finish making it.
Is there ever the temptation for you guys, something that kind of, impresses me about Zeboyd Games and your guys' process at this point, is that you guys don't release things that are half done. You don't do early access. You don't do episodic stuff. You release games that are finished. Is there ever a temptation to sort of move away from that and start, possibly making smaller bite-sized things that you can get out and then sort of finish them after people are playing? Or do you guys feel really committed to making sure that you're making something that is complete, something that is just done and what it's going to be when people start playing it?
Well, there was actually a time right when early access on Steam was announced, when it was still a fresh new concept. We thought, hey, I wonder how that could be applicable to an RPG. I mean, maybe we could use that, maybe not. I don't know. It was before like a whole lot of stuff had come out for it, and it was when mostly multiplayer games were using it just for balancing purposes before it, evolved into what it is. But we kind of just decided not to do it, and just I think that idea just became, hey, we should do a Kickstarter for this and go that route of essentially funding parts of the game to make it what we want it to make from the get-go, rather than like putting an unfinished thing into a service where people pay full price and then they test it or whatever and give feedback. I think that's a little bit of a pitfall, because then you end up in a situation where you're constantly being asked to add features, constant, and I think a lot of early access games fall into this pattern of never being finished, because there's always a new feature being promised, because the community that builds up around it, they're like, hey, you should add this, and they're like, yeah, we should get that, and then you're like, oh, that's a good idea, we're adding that to the list, that shouldn't be hard. And then now you've got this mountain of stuff that you'll never get into the game, and now you've got an early access game that's been in early access for like 5 years. So for us,
it will perpetually be a beta for all time.
Yeah, kind of, until the one day where it's finished and then it's out, and it's kind of like, wow, that game's done, it's out. It's like it's not an early access anymore. It's just kind of there. It's done. I mean, you're so used to hearing about some certain games being in early access that if they came out, finally, it'd be kind of like, well, people have been talking about and playing that game for 4 years, so what's the difference,
Right.
But for us, it's just, we know that a lot of people, you have one shot to make an impression, and it's the first impression that they get. So if they play a thing, whatever it is, a game or a movie or a book or whatever, and the first like 15, 20 minutes, if they play for that long, if it's not a good impression at least, then they're probably going to be done with it. Like, they're just not even going to think about it. If their first impression is very powerful, like if it gets them hyped, if they play it and it's fun and it meets or exceeds their expectations, they're going to want to talk about it and they're want to show other people. And so for us, releasing stuff that's not finished yet, or like little tiny things that are like kind of part of bigger things, doesn't seem to work. It's not as viable for the kind of stuff we do, I guess.
How do you think, something else that really strikes me about your guys' process is that you have a very, very devoted community. You guys communicate with that community, but like you said, you're not sitting there putting something in early access and being like, yeah, so we tweaked and balanced this one dungeon, and we have our beta testers who are playing, this chunk of Cosmic Star Heron. You're not doing that. And what do you think? How do you think the sort of culture of having a constant back and forth with your audience while a game is still being made has changed the process of game making, broadly speaking? And why do you guys, sort of keep it closer to the chest?
Well, we're very open with the community in general, like the RPG community and people that are, fans of our work and stuff. Right. We want to know what they like, and we also want to know what they didn't like about our other games, and we want to know what stuff they're excited about feature-wise for our new stuff. So we're very open about it, and in fact, we will take feedback a lot of times. Like, we'll post something. Just as an example, we did a test. We've done actually several tests for the user interface where we had multiple iterations of the layout, and we basically just posted on our Kickstarter page and also on Twitter saying which one looks best to you guys. And usually there is an overwhelming choice, and so we'd go with that. But so it's not entirely closed off. We're open about the systems, and we'll talk about how we expect things to work, and we'll talk about things we changed.
Right.
We just don't want people to try out something that's janky because it's unpolished and stuff doesn't work and there's glitches and be like, this wasn't what I was hoping. You know what I mean?
Right.
But as far as openness for game development generally, I think if you do it right, I think it's a great thing, because I think there's something really compelling for the community and for gamers and for the market about having a little tiny voice in the production of a project, even if it's really, really small. Like, Twitter comment about a UI is not, a huge impact on the overall design of the game, but knowing that you're being listened to and it having an impact on some part of the game in general, I think it gets people excited. I think developers that do it right end up with a better product. And in some cases, games that do early access right, they can use a lot of the player feedback for the balance and getting things to work and getting features that actually matter and maybe getting rid of ones that don't. So I think for those reasons, it's been I think it's been great. And, on the other hand, there's developers that'll take advantage of it. They'll you don't need to go through many places or many things to find like an early access title that seems to have been designed to just hook people with the concept and then never update and never be finished. Right. So, I mean, that would be the biggest drawback. But overall, I like that there's this ability to talk to your community and see kind of where they think you're going, or where they think what would be cool and what would be a bad idea.
This has been I will go as far as to say that this has been an absolutely insane E3 for RPGs.
Oh yeah! Wow!
It's
just weird. I mean, it's awesome but weird.
Yeah, Bill.
I don't know.
Do you remember a website from the early aughts called the GIA, the Gaming Intelligence Agency? Is this a website you were familiar with?
Yeah, that vaguely rings a bell. Yeah,
it vaguely rings a bell. This was one of those first websites that I felt was like freaking built just for me. It was like all news about like weird Squaresoft imports and stuff like that. And I loved it. I loved this website. And somebody was asking me like, oh, well, what do you think how would you sum up this E3? And I said, it's like the readers of the GIA in 2002 took over the entire industry.
Uh-huh.
So what the hell is happening, man? How did we get to a point where 3 years ago it was the traditional RPG is dead or on life support, and now we have, Shenmue 3 sitting next to Cosmic Star Heroine, sitting next to Nier 2.
Right.
What the hell? What is going on? What's in the water?
Oh, I don't know. It was like I saw someone on Twitter make this comment, so I apologize for not remembering who it was, but they said that the stuff revealed at the Sony conference was the kind of stuff people would joke about the kid whose uncle works at Sony said was going to be announced. You know what I mean? It was like, oh yes,
My
they're going to
cousin
show The
told
Last
me.
Guardian, and they're going to reveal the Final Fantasy VII remake, and Shenmue 3 is going to have a Kickstarter they're going to announce at their conference. And you're like, okay, come on, Last Guardian has been canned, and Shenmue 3, why would they launch a Kickstarter at a conference?
Right.
You know, and why would Final Fantasy VII remake is like the unicorn of the game industry. It's something everybody thinks they want that'll never happen. And then all three were announced. It's crazy.
In a row.
Right. And that's just one of the conferences. And then, like, there's, you know, like you said, like, Nier 2. Did anyone expect there to be a new Nier?
No. Not in a million years. It's the least likely game I have seen announced in, like, a decade. I never in a billion years thought that would exist.
Right. And then there was I don't even know what to call it anymore. The people online are calling it, you know, SMT Cross Fire Emblem or whatever.
Right.
But that almost seems disingenuous to call it that now.
Right. The nearly pornographic RPG for Wii U that is coming out. Like, I saw very briefly earlier today, they were doing like a one of Nintendo's Treehouse sessions with it, and there was an age gate at the front.
Oh,
really? Yeah, when you went to Nintendo of America's YouTube channel, it said, this might show things for a mature audience. And in fairness, when I did click on the age gate, they were showing a boss fight, and they were like, oh, you might recognize this character from previous Fire Emblems. And then, you know, that was the boss, and then the entire party was more or less just wearing lingerie. Men and women. And I was like, damn, Nintendo, what the hell is happening?
Well, you know, I didn't even know that it was like that. I just based my reaction on the thing they showed at their Nintendo Direct, and it was just so crazy, that section of their Direct. And mind you, I'm not even judging the game or not. I'm totally open-minded, and it might be awesome. I'm still looking forward to it.
I feel like what they showed, it's not outlandish. It's very much of a piece with old Shin Megami Tensei games, I would say. Like, it is that. It looks like that. The color palette is far more, you know, in that vein of Persona. It's like very bright, vivid primary colors, and this sort of like pop art aesthetic. Like, they were walking through a town center, and rather than there being, like, you know, fully detailed NPCs, there were all these figures walking around in the background that almost looked like, you know, they looked like those old iPod advertisements from a million years ago, like almost like silhouettes. So it was sort of like a cross between the two.
Right, okay.
And I think it looks great. But
that's good.
Again, talk about bizarre. Talk about...
Yeah, I was very confused. I mean, I knew that they were going in this direction that they kind of hinted at before, but like that whole segment, I didn't know if they had overhauled something or if they were taking it even further in this one direction than I expected. I don't know, but like I said, I'm keeping an open mind about it. It was like this whole E3 has just been kind of like craziness, one after the other.
Do you so for you as an independent developer, why do you think that we're seeing the old publishing institutions and platform holders sort of embrace this style? Is this where you are going to make money in video games at this point, by really, really indulging like what used to be perceived as a niche culture? Or is there just is there some kind of cultural moment happening for developers? Which, where is all this coming from, in your opinion?
You mean with this whole the indie development side of things?
No, with the sort of the theme of E3 2015 being like, let's reinvest in the games that we used to think of as niche. Like, we're talking about things like Fire Emblem Cross Shin Megami Tensei and Shenmue 3. 5 years ago, everybody was saying, oh, look, another shooter. And I think they maybe, we've seen none of that. We've seen a bunch of huge games with, tens of budgets that are probably in the dozens of millions. And, these are games that are not dissimilar to the game that you're making.
Right. Well, okay. So I think there's a couple of things happening. The first thing is that usually at the beginning of a new generation, the big companies they will hedge their bets a little bit by releasing, new big games and established franchises. So like the Call of Duties and Assassin's Creeds and everything like that. But then they also are going to try and plant some roots with some new IPs from the outset of the generation, with the anticipation of essentially building on that IP for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So right now that we're in the beginning of a generation, we're starting to see some of that experimentation by the big companies, and I think that's part of the reason we're seeing some interesting new games. One that I think looks really cool that I don't want people to forget about is Horizon Zero Dawn.
My God,
because,
that looks good. It looks so cool.
And it's from Guerrilla, who's been tied to Killzone pretty much nonstop for like a decade.
Right.
So like that's just one example. But I think another thing that's happening is that this generation, the consoles are a lot more logically constructed from an architecture standpoint. So they're not this bizarre PS3 cell architecture, and they're not, even the Xbox 360 had some quirks with its multi-core, architecture, and then the Wii U has its own thing, but it's not dissimilar from the Wii from the previous generation and the GameCube before that. So I think with that combined with the middleware solutions like Unreal Engine, and it keeps getting better, and Unity is still really good for small and mid-sized companies, and other companies have kind of their own established in-house stuff, that it eases them up to at least try out new things, and hopefully those things sprout into IPs that people like and that they can continue. But I think that just because it's a little easier to experiment and it's a new console generation, I think there's some hedging or some like diversifying of risk by big companies. I also think that there's a little bit more openness to independent developers, and I think that's a little bit to help the big companies get more content and find interesting things to appeal to people, rather than just simply, you're not going to wow people with the average indie game unless it's No Man's Sky. You're not going to wow people from a technical level with our game, but it helps diversify their portfolio of software, and I think that's another reason why that's getting a little bit more of the picture, is just because we're in an era where small studios can make compelling content, and I think it goes along well sort of as a balance to the big AAA stuff. So you can buy a PS4 and enjoy Uncharted, but that you can also play games like like our little game, or you can buy an Xbox One and play Halo, and then on the lower end or the smaller end you have stuff like Super Time Force Ultra, which is also awesome, and people are excited about that. But it's not locked out for budget reasons. Like right. There's no longer that retail model that's necessary for that to happen.
Bill, do you think that we're finally getting to a point where people will look at something like Cosmic Star Heroine and they won't automatically go with saying, oh, well, it looks retro, it looks old school? Well, are we getting back to a place where that style of game is just like, oh, they're making a two-dimensional sprite RPG? Like, are we finally getting back to a place where, the stylistic presentation of games doesn't need to be bleeding edge to be considered relevant for people? Are we finally getting to a place where, games can look like whatever we want them to look like, as far as the general player is concerned?
A little, yes. I will say yes, but a little bit. Like, we're a little bit getting there. I still think that the average player will see something that's pixel art, for example, and just assume that it's playing to nostalgia. And that's just a really broad statement. I don't think that, just for examples, people following our game Cosmic Star Heroine, I don't think they're following it just for the nostalgic angle of the presentation. I don't think that's the only reason. But the mainstream, like, average gamer, if they don't follow this type of thing, they might see pixel art and think, oh, hey, that's cool. It reminds me of what I played when I was a kid. I'll give it a try. Or they might think, oh, that's pixel art. They just want to sell it based on its nostalgia. And for that reason, I don't think that it's just kind of a mentality of, oh, cool, it's a new, this is the art style, and do I like it or not? On the other hand, I saw a thread on the NeoGAF forums about, it was entitled something like the graphics of E3 2015, and I thought, this will be a cool thread to see like screenshots and GIFs of like Uncharted 4, right?
Oh, no.
But one of the top GIFs was from Cuphead, which is a 2D indie game, and a lot of people are impressed with it because it's got an interesting visual style and aesthetic and animation, and even though it's not $100 million production like Uncharted, people are really compelled by the way it looks and the way it is animated. So I do think that we're approaching a situation where something going to be appreciated for its aesthetic, even if it's not cutting edge on the tech side.
When you started saying that, when you were
what did you think I was going to say?
Looking at this NeoGAF thread, I was like, oh my god, it's just going to be an entire thread about bitching how graphics aren't good enough at E3. And the reason that popped in my head is I saw... And part of the reason I asked you that question was, we finally get a trailer for The Last Guardian.
Right.
And I saw just so many people being like, oh, looks like a PS3 game. And it's like, what? Shut up!
I know.
It looks great. It looks so good.
Yeah, you're right. There is some of that. I am seeing a bunch of that too. But, that happens all the time. Like, there's certain individuals who always expect things to look at least as good as Uncharted 4, and it's just... I think the market for Last Guardian is going to be fine with how it looks, honestly. So I'm not worried.
And plus, in terms of that game, like, look, the Team Ico, as it was once known, and Fumito Ueda, like, their games have never been bleeding edge technology games in terms of their presentation. They've always been very stylized. Even Shadow of the Colossus, when it came out in 2005, this wasn't like the greatest PlayStation 2, graphics that anybody had ever seen. It was presented in the way that it needed to be presented. It was the look that, it was what it needed to be. Will Zeboyd Games ever go away from pixel art? Will you guys... is there any temptation to, like, make something that's sort of like, the low polygon style of, N64 PlayStation 1 or a full 3D game, Why are you guys so committed to pixel art?
Well, for one, there's still a lot of room to improve on pixel art stuff. Like, there's a lot further we could go with this style than even with Cosmic Star Hero, and it's just a matter of time and a matter of practice and expertise. So until I feel like we've plateaued on that, I want to keep doing it. But we have talked about maybe doing a 2D game with HD art or high-res art. Sort of like on and off. We've thought about it and like discussed it here and there. It's something I think would be fun to do at some point, but first we gotta go with what we're like efficient at for now until we can get to that point. And right now we're getting more and more efficient at making games that have this presentation that Cosmic Star Heroine has in our past games.
Oh man!
As far as the 3D thing, like, I don't even know. I always thought people didn't want to have nostalgia for the blocky, muddy look of PS1 games, but I'm wrong because I saw a thread on that. There is a legit like nostalgia for that blocky, like pixelated texture, kind of non-animated facial feature type thing, blockhead look. So, I don't think we'll ever do that because I think if you're going to execute that well, I think you have to have that love for that look too.
Yeah.
And since I don't think we have it, and not to say that I won't play a game because it looks like that, but I just don't think we have that spark for that kind of look. So I don't think we'll do like PS1's 3D. If we did PS1, it would be more like one of these games where you had not pre-rendered backgrounds, but backgrounds with a whole lot of detail and stuff. and then sprites on top. Or if we did 3D, which I doubt we'll ever do, but if we did, it would be something like where you have like a 3D map or dungeon and then sprites on top of that, or something to that effect.
Like
and then
like Strider 2 or something like that.
Yeah, or even just as like an easily graspable example would be like Final Fantasy Tactics, which had a 3D board but then 2D sprites, but the sprites were drawn so you could see them from any angle. And there's many other examples from the PS1 and Saturn. But yeah, I think if we did 3D, I don't know if we will, but if we did, probably something like that, so that we're not stuck with these hideously animated 3D model characters, which I think hurts a lot of indie games. Is they'll have like a really good environment modeled out, but then they'll have a 3D character that's very detailed, but when they put in the animation, it's either a store-bought, like a Unity asset sort, or otherwise asset purchased animation, and it just doesn't look right, it doesn't feel right, it doesn't fit the aesthetic of the game when it's in motion, or it just looks wonky. And I wouldn't want to make something that just didn't work. I don't want to make a game where we're trying to do something that's way out of our league in terms of skill set.
Man, that is the great peril, when you sit down, you're like, we're going to make a Unity game, and it's going to be so easy, and we have this enormous library of assets, so we can just buy, and then you end up with something that's, it looks like, instead of a pair of Adidas shoes, you have the Adidams, and they have 4 stripes instead of 3, and they're falling apart, and you have something that looks like ridiculous and generic. That's not to talk, I don't want to disparage somebody who's trying to make a game and try to do it in an affordable way, but that's the problem that you run into.
Right. You really need to, if you're going to do that, you need to either find ones that go together or really rework the ones that you get so that they mesh with the other ones.
Bill, thank you for staying on so long.
Sure.
We only booked you for half an hour, but
that's cool.
You and I have been talking for forever. Unfortunately, that will do it for today. Is there anything else that you would like to tell folks about Cosmic Star Heroine before we sign off?
Oh, not really. I just want to reiterate that the game is still expected to come out on the PC on Steam, like on day 1. We have some questions about that periodically. PC is a huge main priority. We also, PS4 is a huge priority, and so is Xbox One. So if you don't hear about a platform from us for a while, it's probably just coincidence, but those are a huge thing. We also want the Vita version to come out, if we can, with those two. But again, it's just a question of like the cert process and how well our code and stuff works with those platforms when we get to them. So I guess that's all I would really add.
All right, Bill, thank you so much, man. And I said this before we started the call. I am really looking forward to this game. I think it looks awesome. I think you guys have been doing great work up to now, but I'm just thrilled about the way that Cosmic Star Heroine is shaping up. And thank you so much for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and it's been fun, honestly.
Awesome. All right, Bill. Well, let's definitely do this again when
Sounds good.
when Cosmic Star Heroine is out in the ether.
Yeah, for sure.
Everybody, thank you so much for joining with us. Bill, we'll see you next time.
All right, see you then.
Bye-bye. And as for all of you viewing us, Render B, no, that Sega Saturn port isn't on the way, please. Everybody, we will be back tomorrow, bright and early, with more E3 2015 streams. We have an insane lineup of games. We're going to have Epic Games on, talking about Fortnite in the morning. That's going to be at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. After that, we're going to have a whole lot of a game called Skyhill by a team called Mandragora. That is going to be at 1:30. Very interesting looking game. After that, we're going to have none other than David Braben of Frontier Developments on to talk to us about Elite Dangerous. And then after that, Mr. Mike Bithell will be on the stream. We're going to be playing a complete version of Volume with Mike Bithell right here. It's going to be the PC version of Volume, not the PlayStation 4 version of Volume, but hey, it's a complete brand new game that's not even out until September, so check it. Everybody, thank you so much for being here. Yodel, thank you for coming here. Cia Biscara, thank you for coming. Something Mimic, everybody, you guys are awesome. And we will see you tomorrow. And if anybody is out there watching and you haven't followed us yet, please do. Thank you for coming by, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.